Welcome to Health Stealth Radio, where we move away from the mundane to gather insights from the shadows of enterprise and patient cybersecurity. Yes, we surely believe that traditional themes like endpoint software and zero trust are critical, but given massive advances in AI, remote and wearable device hacking, and data hostage negotiators, there's a much darker side to cybersecurity, and not everyone is quite willing to talk about it in public. Health Stealth Radio will thrive on these topics and encourage fireside spats to debate them. Here's your host, Frank Cutitta.
I'd like to welcome my audience tonight on Health Stealth Radio. I'm honored by having Benoit Desjardins. If you're following Health Stealth Radio, you'll know that the last episode that we just had was in a data hostage negotiator. Benoit, could you do an introduction and tell me a little bit about your time at Penn Medicine and some of the things you were doing professionally and recently until moving up to Montreal?
So you got a data hostage negotiator. Wow, that sounds pretty cool and very modern. So I used to be at Penn Medicine until very recently. I moved to Montreal 2 months ago. So at Penn Medicine, I had a triple role. First of all, my main role was that I was an Ivy League academic radiologist. So that's a doctor who interprets images. I was specializing in cardiovascular imaging, mostly CT and MRI, so like cardiac CT, cardiac MR, stuff like that. I was also co-leader of our NIH-funded research lab. We were doing research on myocardial fibrosis and arrhythmia, as well as a bunch of other topics related to that. So I was doing clinical work, teaching, and research, which is a typical triple mission of any academic physician. So that's like my first facet. Second, I was an expert in artificial intelligence, which was the topic of my PhDs from the 1990s. So that was a long time ago. Before AI became really sexy. And I mostly applied it to medical imaging. And my third facet is that I was also an expert in cybersecurity and a white hat hacker. So I was helping to train the latest recruits of the Penn Medicine cybersecurity team by participating in bi-weekly hacking competitions, guiding them on how to solve hacking problems. I also published research on cybersecurity of medical imaging. I was and still am leading the cybersecurity course at the Radiological Society of North America. And I had started also my 2-year term on the cybersecurity committee of the HIMSS Medical Society, which is like the most prestigious kind of, academic cybersecurity committee in the country. Mm-hmm. And I was also an ad hoc consultant for the FBI. So I relocated to Montreal in April. Here I'm working pretty much in all three fields of medical imaging, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. But the medical clinical workload is here is like 4 times less insane than in the US. So gives me more time to do AI and cybersecurity stuff.
It's sort of counterintuitive. I don't want to digress, but Canada gets a bad rap sometime about their medical system there, and one would think that it's overcrowded, but you're saying it's much more civilized.
It's just very different. The US health system has become completely insane at this point with, massive burnout throughout the profession. And right. It's just gotten a little bit too insane.
At what point did you develop this initial interest in hacking that sort of came full circle to what you're doing right now? Where was the initial interest in that?
Well, back before medical school, I had won the Quebec Mathematics Olympiad in the early 1980s. And with the prize money, I bought my first computer, which was an Apple clone computer. I couldn't afford a real one. And I then really soaked all the knowledge about computers like a sponge. And I learned to program by myself in about half a dozen computer languages, ranging from assembly to Pascal. Mm-hmm. These are like very old languages. And of course, I started exploring BitNet at a time, just looking around, hacking my way around. I was really motivated by massive curiosity, which is really what has motivated me in pretty much all my endeavors. Not really an endorphin rush, but really massive curiosity. I was trying to get into different university sites and other sites and to explore as much as I could of the world through my computer. Mm-hmm. There were no laws against it at the time. And of course, I was a minor, so I was pretty safe. But I always adhered to a strict code of not doing any harm to anyone. Since I was hoping to eventually get into medical school, and I was basically one of the good hackers, and I'm one of the good hackers. I also did, for fun, a lot of software cracking at the time, like to remove the protection on computer software, like games and stuff like that. There were no laws against it at the time, but eventually the RCMP in Canada started looking into the practice, and at that point, they were planning to come up with laws, and I just stopped completely. And then I had been admitted to medical school in Canada and did not want to get into trouble. So I kind of completely gave up hacking at the time. Well, maybe gave up 90% of hacking.
And the other 10%?
Did
you refocus? Did you refocus?
Interesting.
Did you refocus in a different area, or did you just do it less time?
Less time.
Yeah. So everybody has a different notion, especially now. This cybersecurity is not just a word that people use. It's become the news item of the evening. So and there are all these aspects of it in terms of things like social engineering. I know that you've said that you didn't really do social engineering when you were doing it then. It's become very popular now. What are you seeing is from your professional opinion in all of the areas that you're in, what do you see as the nexus of social media and cybersecurity dangers these days?
Well, social media is, very often an entry door into some, hacking exploits. Is a way to kind of do some form of social engineering by gathering as much information as you can about an individual or a company by just looking at, conversations of people in that company and try to find out about what's going on, who works there, who does what, and then try to target specific high-level individuals, like not necessarily high-level in the company, but say, somebody who's a computer admin with all the passwords and the access to the network. So you're trying to, social engineering access to that person by finding as much as you can about that person through social networks. So it's not something that I've ever really done myself per se, but it's something that's very, very common. It's like a little bit like when you are inside the company, you're like trying to, listen to conversation around the water fountain or something like that, but it's doing it secretly by just browsing the internet and, looking at social media.
And I know you said you did explore some of the not necessarily the dark web, but some of the darker areas, something like the Tor network and things like that. Could you tell us a little bit about where people, whether white hat or the bad guys, where these people hang out, and where is there a place where they share? I hate to call them best practices.
Well, there's many kinds of environment for many kinds of different people. Like the dark web is mainly for the bad guys. There's a lot of bad information there. Anything bad that you can think of, like, getting drugs, getting kiddie porn, getting fake diplomas, hiring a hitman, et cetera, et cetera. This is all on the dark web. When I initially found out about it, I kind of looked around, and it was like not something that was very appealing to me because I was not into any of that stuff. I never did drugs, don't even drink alcohol. But what they had was no interest to me. And there's a lot of information in there that you can find about, say, lists of hacked passwords. So if you want to buy hacked password, if you want to buy, say, for example, if you have like a hospital that has a ransomware attack and they steal, the information about several terabytes of data on patient files, that information can be made available for purchase on the dark web. And you can either by bulk, like information about 90,000 people, or by a la carte, which is information about like this patient, which happens to be a prominent politician or whatever. So you can find that on the dark web. It's very scary what you can find there. And of course, you pay by Bitcoins, which are untraceable. So essentially, nobody knows. And what's interesting is that like this information, this leaked information, can be sold and resold many, many times, because it's not like buying something at Amazon, for example,
Right.
where you buy the item and you have it, and they can't sell the same item twice. But medical record that's leaked, they can sell that to many, many, many different people.
Sure, and they do.
Yeah.
So most of this is when you're learning how to do this. I mean, you have two different approaches. I mean, you can learn how to hack academically by just taking cybersecurity courses and things like that. And then you could learn just by an intuitive nature of just studying it. I mean, what's the learning curve? I mean, how did you, in terms of the most successful hacks that you did, legal, let's reinforce legal, what would you say the skill set was that you had to do that? Was it mostly from academic, or is it from quote unquote on the hack training?
Well, when I decided to kind of retool myself, I took a couple of certifications in cybersecurity, CEH, CISSP, OSCP, stuff like that were like the main ones. Gave me, good practice and updated knowledge about what was going on, that I could build on my previous skill set, which, was a long time ago. So things had changed. And so it was mainly academically. And then, of course, it was a starting point. And then, of course, you go on the internet and you find out a bunch of stuff about different things. I mean, just sky is the limit about what you can learn on the internet. Everything is there, essentially. It's just like, if you know what you're looking for, it's really there. And if you want to, say, focus on a specific area, you just read everything about that on the internet and you become kind of, expert in this area. And so I kind of like did that. So initially formal training, formal certifications, and then went from there to retool myself in areas that I needed.
So I think it's interesting from a personal point of view of how your son actually inspired you to get back into this after you had sort of grown up and went into your professional life. Could you tell our Health Stealth Radio audience a little bit about how that reemergence came back?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. My son had started in computer science in college, and he kind of lacked the drive and motivation. And I wanted to help motivate him. And so I brought him to DEF CON in Las Vegas in 2017 to try to expose him to very highly motivated young hackers, young people like him who were very motivated and like to do computer stuff, hoping that some of the motivation and drive would rub off on him. And for myself, during that week, I just wanted to attend a small evening session in cybersecurity and healthcare. That was in a small room, 30 chairs. I think it was like a Tuesday evening. So I get there, small room. There were 500 people waiting in line at the door trying to fit. I said, what the heck is going on? And so fortunately, they moved us to a big room to fit all the people. Then I learned that, this was just after very, very recent worldwide attacks by WannaCry and NotPetya, which had dramatically transformed cybersecurity and healthcare into a very, very hot field. And this is why there were 500 people, because they were very interested in the area because of these two recent hacks. And so the motivation of these, young hackers did rub off, but it kind of rubbed off on me, my son. And so I regained interest in the field and decided, like I said, to retool my hacking skill set by doing a few cyber certification like CEH, CISSP, OSCP. And I also decided to connect with the leaders in cybersecurity and healthcare. So after that, the next conference I attended was the HIMSS Healthcare Cyber Forum in Boston, and where I met all the top leaders in cybersecurity and healthcare. and connected with many of them, especially one called Richard Stainings, who's a guru in healthcare cybersecurity, and we've been giving many talks together over the years. And, after retooling myself and connecting with these people, I started getting invited to speak at conferences and retreats and became part of the cyber leaders.
Fantastic. I had a relationship with
one thing that I should mention is really interesting is the importance of persistence. At that HIMSS cyber forum, there was an interesting evening session. It was kind of like a hacking simulation of kind of an attack against a company. And they had invited all top cybersecurity leaders to participate. It was at the X-Force IBM Center in Cambridge.
One of my favorite places.
I really, really wanted to go, but I was just brand new, coming back, reacquainting myself with the field. I was not a leader yet, but I really wanted to go. And so all day long, in between talks at the conference, I stopped at the IBM booth and I kept bugging them, telling them, I really, really want to go. Can you give me tickets? Really nonstop. And eventually they got me tickets and I participated in that simulation. And this is where I was able to intimately connect with many, many of the healthcare cyber leaders. And it really ended up being a really, really good move for me. So it's important, persistent pays. When you want something that seems very small, keep at it. And when you get it, it can open.
Absolutely. Very interesting. I'd just like to take a moment and thank our viewers and our listeners. This is Health Stealth Radio. I'm proud to have Benoit Desjardins, who's speaking today on hacking and his experience with AI and cybersecurity. What are some of the silliest mistakes and one of the major vulnerabilities that could be easily solved that you see as you travel around and talk to people in these enterprises? What are the simple mistakes and lessons learned from them?
Well, these days, most attacks start with a phishing email received by an employee that allows cybercriminal to get through the hospital safety perimeter. They gather information, they load software on the employee's computer, and they can get in eventually to the hospital. And the problem is that hospitals have become more and more open with more and more employees working at a distance, especially since the pandemic and during the pandemic. And so it becomes more and more difficult to protect not only the hospital, but its numerous attachments, like all these employees working from home, as well as protect, third-party vendors. So the situation is getting worse and will continue to get worse because it's not going to stop work at home. And you need to protect, not only the hospital, but every appendages of the hospital, which is, employees at home, where you don't necessarily control their full computer, where they might, browse on the net and shady sites and download malware, and then that malware can, hook up to the hospital connection whenever they next connect to the hospital. So it's a big problem. Another area of weakness for hospitals is network segmentation. One of the problems is that once a hacker gets in through the external periphery of the hospital, network, he often gains full access to the hospital entire network because there's no segmentation. And so by doing segmentations, they could get in, but then they can only see a small part of the network. And so that would be a lot of trouble trying to have them access the full network by hacking, finding many ways to hack the stuff. And also, another problem is that hospitals have tens of thousands of medical devices connected to the internet. And it's become very, very difficult to protect everything. Most hospitals can't even figure out the complete list of all the devices they have connected on their network. And so that's a major task. And another issue that is specific to hospitals is that, very often you have to patch devices to the latest software because they find vulnerabilities. But a problem is that very often network medical devices are difficult to patch because, say, look at a ventilator, patients on the ventilator with COVID for an entire week, and then you find a vulnerability on the ventilator that's hooked up to the internet. You can't say, well, let's bring down the ventilator to patch a system because you're going to kill the patient.
Right.
Not really good. We try to avoid that as much as possible. And so that is a problem very often. You can't, you know that there are vulnerabilities, but you can't patch them because they're constantly in use. And that's where, segmentation would help, of course, because it would, create a little firewall against that specific device, preventing access to it. So, but there's many other vulnerabilities available there.
In your white hat work, was there a remote device that seemed to be more vulnerable than others that you would test to say maybe I could get in through the watch or something like that? Or is that a silly notion?
I mean, every device has its vulnerabilities. I mean, we've got cybersecurity researchers that have hacked through pacemakers and insulin pumps, and then can trigger them to kill patients. Mm-hmm. So these are potentially hackable. Another thing is infusion pumps in general, they're very networked, and they're used to inject medications in patients. And so if you hack that can create a lot of problems. That could be an entry to a system. Anything else also, an air conditioning system might be an entry to a system. I mean, you might have heard that there was a casino in Las Vegas that got hacked, and the initial entry point was the computer system that was controlling a fish tank. And so essentially, you got to be creative. You don't think that you're going to protect the fish tank. You want to protect your, the everything electronic is, but you don't think
that's the back door.
But that's the back door.
So yeah, I mean, you obviously, you have this portfolio life and this convergence of cybersecurity and AI amongst other things. What do you think about this arms race? How do you think this is going to explode in terms of AI generated hacking let's call it generative hacking at the same time?
I mean, AI is transforming healthcare very, very rapidly, especially my field of radiology, which is very computer intensive and is really a perfect environment for AI. AI can be used for both offensive and defensive aspect of cybersecurity. Now, from an offensive point of view, the biggest issue that I find is that it makes non-specialists with limited hacking skill sets very, very dangerous. Mm-hmm. A lot of people like that. So
from the coding perspective.
Yeah, they're not coders. They just essentially use the software. So this will dramatically increase the pool of attackers and as a result, make a lot of damage. Now, from a defensive point of view, it will help the speed of detection of intrusions and attacks. As you know, a hacker takes on average 5 hours to get all your important data after he can successfully break into your company. 5 hours. Wow. And very often, the break-ins are not detected for months. On average, it's 280 something days. By the time you detect it, the hacker is long gone. So AI could be used to supplement and eventually replace humans for defensive purposes. Mm-hmm. It could, for example, detect intrusions instantly while the humans are sleeping at night. But of course, AI is used more and more for attacks. You might have heard, I'm certainly have heard about deepfake videos and all that. Oh, yeah. So in the AI arms race, attackers still have the edge because of the asymmetry in their task. Much easier for them to get in by some way than for the defender to protect against every single attack.
Imagery has been renowned for being way ahead of the AI game. Have there been areas where radiology has been hacked, or the damage that can be done is not just personal information, but it's also incorrect diagnosis?
As part of my bi-weekly hacking exercises at Penn, one of them that we had was to try to hack into a test PACS system, PACS. Mm-hmm. It's essentially the system that radiologists use to store and read images. Mm-hmm. And I was able to hack into it by inserting PHP code into the header of a DICOM image file, which is the format for medical images, and then upload it into the server. And I was able to trigger a remote command execution and took over the system. A few years ago, I created a blue ribbon team made up of the 2 leaders of the DICOM security work group, as well as a few hackers and cybersecurity researchers with published exploits on medical images. And we identified many vulnerabilities Now, the problem is that the DICOM standard has several security features like encryption and digital signatures that are, targeted to protect it. But most vendors have not implemented them, or when they have implemented them, they're rarely used. And the reason is that there's a lack of practical and efficient management of keys and certificates, which are used for encryption and digital signatures. Now, the DICOM leaders are looking into different frameworks to help that, like the ACME framework to help manage keys.
Everybody's talking about Change Healthcare, Ascension, what happened there. And I want to tie another question into that. To what extent does the government need to get more involved in cybersecurity? Is that an intrusion, or is that a mandate that's required?
So these two hacks have been very, very interesting hacks. I mean, they're like ransomware attacks, essentially. And I believe is a prelude of what is to come more and more frequently in the future. It's really considered at this point the most significant cyber attack on the US healthcare system ever. Nearly 94% of hospitals in the US have experienced financial repercussions from this single cyber attacks. That's huge. And this attack is really jeopardizing the survival of countless healthcare providers nationwide due to delays in patient care and reimbursement. And that could lead to many bankruptcies down the line. Now, for the Ascension hack, they were disrupted last month by a ransomware attack. It affected the electronic healthcare systems, phone capabilities, and everything's been offline. And they had to go back to manual and paper-based processes, like the typical cyber attack. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing is that this is just your typical ransomware attack. The problem is that the size of the
scale,
the hospital network is just massive. And so instead of having one hospital being attacked, it's like we're dealing with something that affects 140 hospitals at the same time. So we're going to see that quite often in the future. As for government is kind of necessary to help hospitals to defend themselves. The problem right now is that the US is a society of blame. The solution to the problem, stop punishing the victims of cybercrime. They're faced with huge fines from the government just for being victim of a cyber attack. And that's followed by tons of class actions lawsuits from greedy lawyers, which diverts valuable resources away from protection and patient care. Cybercrime right now is really one of the two elements that's currently destroying the US healthcare system. And we're going to see that more and more. The other element being, of course, the US medical legal system. And what the problem is that when the government punishes the victims of cybercrime instead of the perpetrators, then there's no incentive for perpetrators to stop hacking hospitals. I work very closely with many organizations, and one of them is the HSCC, the Health Sector Coordinating Council. And the goal is to help medical institutions to protect themselves. But if you look at a small center, a small hospital, a small clinic, they have one IT guy who handles the repair of all the computers in the institution. They need to be helped, not punished if they're a victim of an attack.
It's an extreme honor to be able to talk with you tonight.
That was great. I really enjoyed it.
We'll keep this going, I assure you.
Excellent.
Thank you for joining us today in the shadows for this episode of Health Stealth Radio with Frank Cutitta. If you like the program, please be sure to share your comments on our social media sites, or feel free to contact us with suggestions for new and stealthy show themes. We look forward to welcoming you again for our next broadcast. In the meantime, stay safe out there.